Welcome everyone to our dp2 micro learning session today. It's part of our kind of image optimization series. And today's program, we're going to be talking about auto enhancement. Just a couple of things before we get started. We are recording the session. You can use the Q&A, the questions panel, in order to write in questions, and I'll open it up for questions at the end of the presentation. And I think looks like most of you have joined before, so I probably will go kind of quickly through these next couple of slides. The image optimization tools that we're talking about in this series are tools that are at no cost to the lab. They're built into dp2. You may have tried them in the past. You may have tried them here or there and maybe not felt that they were successful as you would hope they were. So we're going to try to look a little bit about at that for auto enhancement today. There's some of the other things that we've looked at. We did a session that is now on our YouTube channel for auto head alignment and group balance. Today we're going to talk about auto enhance. A little piece of that will be about auto balance, but we'll do auto balance and auto balance match separately, and then click balance and some other of the other tools in dp2 that you can use at different points in your workflow in order to be able to make the most of the images that are coming into your lab. So for auto enhancement, we're going to talk today. We're going to spend most of our time in dp2 as we have in the others, but we're going to look at it from a couple of different points of view. Auto enhancement is an algorithm that looks at the exposure distribution within an image and then automatically adjusts the local area contrast for highlight and shadow regions. And it is a much more complex algorithm than a DRGB, or what we might call a linear color correction in dp2. So we're going to kind of take a look at those tools and what they're designed to do. I'm going to run through a series of examples so I can kind of show you how that's all supposed to work. The auto enhancement algorithm is designed to work both with the highlight details, depending on, of course, if it's blown up by overexposure and there's nothing left in the image, but also within the shadows. It uses that mid-tone as its pivot point. These images, like auto balance and like group balance, right? They're designed for a very specific type of image to try to resolve a specific problem. So as an example, in group balance, we're looking at schoolwork or, kind of a more controlled exposure. For auto balance and auto enhance, those are really designed initially for digital camera images, but they're really now for images that, maybe they were outside, there's less, control over the exposure, or maybe they're coming in from a variety of places, maybe they're consumer images. So this algorithm is designed specifically to look at those images and solve those kinds of problems. And a good example is if you have shadows in the foreground because you've got a lot of light in the background, or large contrast between the subject and the background. And it's designed to make changes to kind of bring the highlight down and the shadow up so that you get a more even distribution. One of the other things that I'll mention as we're talking about the theory of this algorithm is that what it does is it uses not just kind of the pixel itself, but also the image content. So as an example, a pixel of a specific value in one part of the image might actually get changed differently than the same pixel value in another image, because it's driven not just by, again, those linear values, but the algorithm is looking at the image overall and making those local changes. So that's kind of an important piece to think about when you're looking at how this works. So, and I kind of covered by bullet items here, really. And again, it's, examines the exposure distribution, adjusts the local area contrast of highlights and shadows, and we'll be looking at that. It enhances the detail, right? If there's information in there to enhance. you can make manual corrections on the adjust images or automate correction on the auto balance batch. And that's actually where we're going to start. Oftentimes I'll show it to you manually so that it can kind of give you a sense of the dials and the buttons. And we are going to do that so that I can show you examples. But I want to talk more about the way that it was conceived in terms of how they thought people would use it, which is in an automated setting. So we're going to start there in this one. So just as a reminder, helpful resources. The dp2 help for auto enhancement is really pretty good at explaining some of the theory. We're going to look a little bit more at practice. It does kind of outline it, but we're going to look a little bit more at practice in dp2, reminding you, of course, that the help link in the help, dp2 help is the service portal link. And get you access to the knowledge base. And all the time we're trying to add things and enhance that. And when something happens and we learn something from a customer or something changes in dp2, we're trying to get that in there. Then, of course, you can always request one-on-one training and support. And this will be posted on the YouTube channel. The link will be put into Service Desk. And I'll try to remember quickly to get the Q&A in there. And so with that, let's take a look at dp2. I'm going to start with, I created an order that was specific to being able to give you different examples. So this might not typify an order you would see in your lab because there's a lot of different things happening. But I think these images will create a good opportunity for you to get a sense of what is possible, depending on how you set it up and what different preferences you're using and so on. So the way in which this was designed was initially that the thought was that you would be running it in auto balance batch. So what that would mean is that you would set, when you imported the order, however you manage your statuses, if you manage your statuses in dp2, you would be setting that status, right? And you would, in this case, you would be setting it to auto balance, which of course I have it already done, but I just want to kind of point that out, that was the thought, so that when you get to auto balance batch, your setups and so on, you've already kind of done your due diligence in terms of what it is you want to do here. Now, I'll go through this. I'll go through the auto balance part of this in that piece, that presentation. But the whole idea of where am I in the workflow is important here, because auto enhance is really designed to work after the image has already had any linear auto balance, even manual D or GB corrections made to it. And there's some assumption in the way it was designed that you've already done that. So order is important here. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that you're going to want to think about when you're using this in an automated setting. So in a case like this, and I'm actually not going to run it, only because if I run it, then I don't have anything to show you. But I do want to walk through it. So I'm not going to so much talk about the auto balance piece of it, but I do want to point out that you can create setups. This works the same way it does everywhere else in dp2, right? If you create a setup or whatever you do, and you can say it be a function of whatever you had set up in this window. Now, the auto balance option makes an assumption. I am going to manually run it this way, that you're either, density red, green, and blue, or just red, green, and blue, and so on. You have those options here. The preference, the auto balance preference, you've got a series of 4 of them, and I'm going to, when we're in the manual, where I can kind of toggle back and forth, I want to show you some of those differences. So the differences are not only relevant to auto balance, but they're also going to be relevant to auto enhance. And when we go through those examples, I'm going to, we have a kind of default. This is where it defaults to, which is sort of a neutral set of preferences. And I'll go through the preferences and all of those things when I do the auto balance piece. But in an automated setting, you can see down here, I don't know if you can see kind of my mouse moving around, but where it says run auto balance, that you could leave that running in the background. That's the kind of thing in your lab, if you were automating this workflow, set it up, this type of image, right? That falls kind of within the criteria, set it up to auto balance, and you can do it, do them here if you want manually to just run it as they go, or you can set it up to be running automatically so that any order that comes in that says auto balance will go ahead and be auto balanced, and then you can set the status on complete. Now, the design of this was so that if it was set to adjust, then an operator could, color correcting operator could either open it in the digital analyzer or in adjust images, check the changes, make whatever other changes they needed to make. And then it would, of course, really increase the productivity overall because a certain layer of correction would already be made. So that's why this is set up. There are two checkboxes down here that I want to talk about, and it's going to give me an opportunity to also highlight a couple of things about auto enhancement. We have one checkbox for apply auto enhancement. The other one is for marking for auto enhancement. And the difference between the two is that when you apply auto enhancement, it's going to apply it right then and there. So within the auto balance batch processing, it's going to go ahead and apply that auto enhancement. Now, that might be, depending on how many images you're running through here, it could be processor intensive, and so you might want to have it on a high powered box because it's not just making linear changes. It's making much more complicated, it's looking at the math and it's looking at the pixel. So there's a lot more going on. If you mark it for auto enhancement, what's going to happen is that it's going to go ahead and it's going to save the changes to the database, but it's actually not going to permanently apply them until it's actually rendered out to the printer. But of course, because you've added an extra step to the rendering process, you may see some impact down the line. So it's kind of do it now or do it later. And it's kind of an important thing to note if you're going to be doing this in an automated way. Now, one other caveat around auto enhancement, it is one of those other places, one of the very few places actually in dp2 that we make a permanent change to the image. Now, there are some ways to kind of capture that, just like you could in in other places in dp2, where you kind of want to grab at that original image, it's not obviously making the same type of merge as you were using auto retouching or some of the other things in dp2, but this is one of those places where we make a permanent change. So I just wanted to make you aware of it. So this is really, that's kind of the heart of it. That's really how this was designed. The thought was that folks were going to test it. They were going to create or modify or use specific auto balance preferences, run auto balance first, because we want you to do those kinds of corrections before you get to this point in your workflow. And then the operators are really going to be reviewing them. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to bring up adjust images, which is where we can kind of manually look at these different, the capabilities and how it behaves. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to open these images up sort of one at a time, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about the auto balance and auto enhance. So I'm going to mimic what might be happening in an automated setting, and then I'll kind of walk through different types of images. And I've set up these images obviously to make some, to give you some sense, right, of what's going to happen in the different ways. Some of them I'm going to do multiple changes to them, others I'm not. This is a process because I'm also in the manual adjust images. I haven't made those corrections yet, so the corrections are being saved back to the database. Even though I'm saving them here, I can say no AE, this button right here in the center. And I can move back into a normal manual workflow. And just one of the other reasons why I want to show you this, because it's really going to help to highlight the differences, the kind of before and after for you. The auto balance tab in adjust images, if you're already using auto balance, I'm going to leave this at the default preference. There are some images that I'm going to take a look at. What does it look like if I use a different kind of a preference, just to kind of point those out. We have a preference for auto enhancement, and I'll be kind of demonstrating with that as well. But again, all of these things are the same switches that we saw in the auto balance batch, right? Here's our preferences. Here's our, DRGB, RGB, or just density. It's all the same thing. This is just that automated environment. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and run my auto balance, and I'm just going to select DRGB, just as if it's made some minor corrections, nothing huge. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply AE, and to notice a couple of things. First of all, you can obviously, I hope, see that that image got substantially brighter. And a couple of things that I want you to kind of point out. You'll notice that once I selected AE, all my linear changes, the DRGB, density, and red, green, and blue, are all grayed out. And that would also be true here, the sliders, although you can see the corrections it made, the sliders are grayed out. And if you were doing this, looking at this in the digital analyzer, of course, in an automated workflow, you'd be able to see the corrections that were made by using the auto balance or making those corrections first. But you wouldn't see offsets for auto enhancement. It doesn't really work that way. Just so that you kind of have an awareness and don't have that expectation. A couple of other things, if you've never used this tool before, with AE sort of running, you're going to see that plus sign in the lower left-hand corner of the image. If you're not thoroughly familiar with the dp2, that asterisk that's in the upper right says that I haven't saved it. And I'm not actually going to save it. I'm just going to reset it, or I can hit Z to zero it out. But just because of what I'm doing, I'm going to go ahead and reset it just so that you can kind of get an idea. So that's one type of an example of the things that are happening with the two working together. I have this image because I want to demonstrate with this image not just what it's going to do in terms of exposure when it's making those linear corrections, but also what it's just a good example of what the algorithm, the auto enhancement algorithm, is going to do kind of in return, if you will. So it's, it's modified the exposure. You can see it took out quite a bit of density. If I apply auto enhancement, what you're going to see is that it goes back in some places that had gotten where the density change, you can kind of see it further enhanced that image. And again, I am just using that default preference, just kind of for my example. And I have a couple of things. Now, this is an image where you might say to yourself, well, is that really going to be appropriate? There's not a lot of contrast. There's not a lot of this. But I do want to give you a sense, even on an image like this, which looks like it's pretty neutral. I'm going to use the default, and then I'm going to use kind of, we have a low neutral, low color. And in a case like this, the difference isn't going to be dramatic. So depending on kind of the range and how you're looking at your images in your lab might determine, because you might find that there's a wide range of images that can be used in that, using that default preference. So I'm just going to make manually make the corrections that the auto balance would have made. And then I'm going to apply the AE, and you can see that it's a combination of those two things, which is why order of importance, why that becomes so important. And I'm going to move through a couple of other images, and what I'm trying to give you that sense of foreground and background and other things that are happening. So I make those RGB changes, and then I'm making that AE, and in this particular image, gives you a real sense of that foreground and background, which I kind of wanted to really point out for you. So this is a wedding image, and if you've been around dp2 for a while, you've seen it before. But I want to kind of give you a sense of what's happening in these images. So again, I'm going to make the basics, some very minor DRGB. And in this one, the changes are more subtle. But this one gives me kind of an opportunity to look at some other kind of smaller changes that are happening. And you can see that AE, it did brighten up some things, but it didn't really lose. We're not losing a lot of the detail. Where there was no detail, we're not gaining it, but we're getting more information in the shadow detail of the groom's suit and so on. So that's the type of thing that this is addressing. And I'm just going to kind of go through a series of these images to kind of give you some more examples. And oh, that's right, I'll go back to it. Actually, I'm going to go back to it now. I wanted to look at this one with a different preference. So if I'm over here in auto balance, now one of the things we'll talk about in the auto balance workshop is I do have more than you probably have in your system. Because I have done a little bit of testing and I've tried to, because these can be changed, and within the auto balance help, you can look at, modifying those and creating your own. But I'll go ahead and demonstrate it with the auto enhancement. I'm going to first do no AE so that I can get back to where I was, and I'll zero those out. I'm going to use the auto enhancement algorithm. The first thing I'll do, of course, is run auto balance. And that's actually going to be about where it was. There's small degrees of change. But then when I run the AE, you can see that it's a reflection of kind of some of those minor changes. And depending on what you're after or what your customer preferences are or how that works, might determine whether or not you use this one as opposed to the other one. So I'm going to just kind of zero these. I'm actually going to reset this one. And then I can go back and we can look at, the difference with maybe low neutral, low color. It's really, a lot of this is subjective. The math behind this isn't subjective, right? Some people made some decisions based on kind of the Kodak imaging standards and what we think, is the right way to do this. One other thing that I want to mention about working in a manual environment, and I'm actually not going to set it this way because we are we've got our web interface. But in the view, if you're working in this view, what you're going to want to do is set your preferences and your detail to image to best quality. It'll take a little bit longer on screen, right, because I'm rendering more image information, but it'll be much better. It'll be a much better way to actually see and forecast with not only what changes are being made to the image, but what it'll look like going out onto the printer. So you kind of want to have, you want to really look at it from that point of view. And again, the design of this was that you would be, automating the process and then reviewing it more manual, either in the digital analyzer or here in Adjust Images. So that's really kind of the design of that. I'm not going to set it that way because I think it'll bog us down in GoToWebinar. So, So, as we go through I want to encourage you to do your own testing and to really look at, based on the population of images, what kind of results are you seeing and so on. Because what you can also do, once you've run either in an automated way or in a manual way, once you've run those algorithms, you can, use these sliders in this environment to make additional changes so that if you wanted to, you can see these aren't like making huge density changes. They're not, it works a little bit differently because the math is different. So it's not just going to be 1 to, 255. So I want to kind of point that out and make sure that I visited that a number of times. So that's kind of the essence of this program. I'm going to run through some more images because I do want to give you a sense of what are different kinds of images and how they're going to behave. So here's another one, and I'm going to run the auto balance first, and you can see there's, a lot of these were relatively well exposed going in. I actually did try to look for, there's a couple of these in art, but I tried to look for things that would, you can see in an image like that. it's just bringing that, that detail up. It's just enhancing that overall correction in these types of images. Again, and so that's kind of an important piece. Here's another one that's kind of a simple consumer image, where I want to be able to, make a very minor correction actually for auto balance, but it's going to make a very nice correction, an automated correction for this type of image in this flow for auto enhancement. And the same things are true for some of these images where it's mildly overexposed, and we're going to make our auto balance corrections, which are just going for exposure, but that AE correction is going to kind of bring her back to life, right? In a case like this, it's not going to change overall what's happening in the image, but it's going to give us some extra image information that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Here's another one that I only have a couple more minutes left to my kind of 30-minute window. So I wanted just kind of another image. This one's got a lot of color in it. It's got kind of visually has a lot going on, right? So you've got, and this is another one where I can change those parameters. So in this case, I'm going to go back to our default and I'll run the adjust, again, relatively minor changes. But then I'm going to run the AE, and you can see it really brings up, in this case, that green without sacrificing her. And one of the things about this algorithm is that it does maintain that detail. So the face doesn't kind of disappear and the skin doesn't start to look mottled. She looks kind of that enhances really the way that she looks against this type of a background. So that's kind of auto enhancement. It is one of those tools in dp2 that when you spend the time to work with it and test it and look at your population of images, it can be really useful. One other thing I'm not sure that I said I do want to say is when you're in the manual environment, if I hit no AE, you'll be able to kind of toggle back and forth, and then I can hit AE again and it'll go ahead and apply it. Just so that you have that sense of being able to, and I've saved some and not others, which, in a test environment doesn't matter. In production, it certainly does. And so that is auto enhancement. And I made it sound fairly simple. It's a pretty sophisticated algorithm. And it is one of the few places in dp2 that we make changes to local color as opposed to making changes to kind of the global, the overall contrast, set gamma and saturation and so on. So it was an important add to the automated workflows, for wide ranges of exposure and digital camera files and consumer images and so on, or, the kind of mom and pop, sports and other types of shooters. So that is auto enhancement, and I'm going